Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Arvada, the City of Arvada's official podcast. We are really excited to have our guest Sam Rogers on today. He has a background in civil engineering. He's a civil engineer and he got his degree from Colorado School of Mines and has worked for the city now for about 3 years as a project manager and an engineer for our stormwater and floodplain department. And prior to that, he worked for a private firm doing the similar engineering for nearly 10 years, and really great conversation. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Sean. Hi, Sean.
Hi, Katie. We've been trying to get Sam on as a guest for a little while now, so I was glad we were able to make it happen. Obviously, he's super busy with all the work he has going on, but it was worth the wait. It was really interesting to hear from Sam the background behind the Ralston Creek project that we'll talk about and what was causing the need for that improvement project. And so it dates back to the 2013 flood, actually, which was something I did not know. And with that, we'll get to the interview. Hi, Sam. Welcome to Inside Arvada. Thanks so much for joining us today. Let's begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do for the city.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Happy to be here. My name's Sam. I'm a Colorado native. I was born and raised here, and I've lived in Arvada for about 5 years now, and just absolutely love it. And really what I do at the city is I work in our public works department as a civil engineer, and more specifically I work with our stormwater and floodplain team, and really just manage a lot of our bigger CIP projects that we have, and even design a few of them myself if they're small enough and easier to manage. But that's most of what I do.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention CIP is our capital improvement projects, which are like big, kind of expensive projects.
Yeah,
That's the gist of it. And so we're going to talk about one in particular that's ongoing right now. But before we do, you mentioned you get to go out in the field, and often near our parks and trail system, because that's where our waterways tend to be as well. And that's kind of the work you do. And so one that was recently completed over at Lake Arbor, and then the one we're going to talk about a little bit more here in a minute on the west side of town along Ralston Creek. But because of those locations, I think sometimes it can be conflated with those looking like they're park improvement projects or trail improvement projects. But that might be a piece of it at the end of the project, but that's really not the impetus. So can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what is a stormwater or flood project?
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you brought that up, and I want to touch on that more in a little bit here because, a lot of our projects do end up intersecting with a lot of different departments, a lot of overlapping goals, whether it's like with the parks or streets even or other utilities. But yeah, typically with our specific stormwater or floodplain projects, really a lot of those stem from some sort of need, whether it's to stop erosion somewhere or improve a flood risk that's pretty high, or if there's an area that's pretty prone to flooding. Those are usually the driving factors behind a lot of our projects, and they could range from, we generally have a mixture of projects that are kind of in like an open river system through a park or something like that, and we even have projects that are just like closed conduit storm sewer pipes, and they're underground, and a lot of that takes care of a lot of the drainage that comes off of our roads and other hard surfaces. So, and a lot of those you don't even really notice once everything's done. You don't even really know something's there, which is kind of a bummer. You like to kind of show off your projects, but they're just as equally as important, those storm sewer projects. But obviously, with our creek restoration projects, those are usually the ones that are more visible in the public eye. And like you said, Katie, they generally do run through our parks, and when you think about it, that actually probably is a good spot for a creek to run. It's kind of in a more open space. There's nothing else really around it. There's ideally no other homes or critical infrastructure. It's just kind of just a nice big park open space, and you can equate that to thinking about like a rural countryside, and you have a river running out there. There's really no risk out there. There's no flood risk. I mean, if the creek were to erode or move around or meander more, change itself over time, that's really not a big deal, right? There's nothing around that would damage or cause harm to. And if a big flood were to happen out there in the countryside, it's like, well, that's okay. It's just flooding, like the overbanks is what we call it, or like the pieces outside of the channel. So it's a lot different though when we're in a more urban setting like here in the city, where we do have homes around some of our river systems or pieces of critical infrastructure or trails or bridges, things like that. So that's where we come in and try to help stabilize an area or just improve the flood carrying capacity of our river systems so that it doesn't have that risk.
And that had me thinking like two things that I'll just touch on quickly and then we can keep going. But the storm sewer, so the closed storm water systems that are piping underground under our roads are separate from our sewer system, first off. That's not true everywhere in the country, so some people may be more familiar with a different system. But often you'll see those no dumping signs or like the little like icon with the fish on it or whatever.
Yeah.
And so just for people's awareness that that water is going straight back into our streams and ponds. And so by, polluting that water system, it's not going to a sewer a wastewater treatment plant before it goes back into that system. So that's why it's really important to keep that clean and do things like pick up dog poop and litter and all of those things.
No, you're absolutely right, and that could be like a whole nother topic,
Sure,
just talking about
yeah.
stormwater quality and that sort of thing. And we do have, the other half of our team at the city does deal with that, just stormwater compliance, making sure we're keeping our river systems and just storm drainage systems as clean as possible. And it's a requirement by the state too. We're actually under their program, and it's administered through the state, I think the state health department, and we're required to do certain things to make sure that our stormwater quality is up to standards and we're not polluting it and things like that. And it's not just, us. Obviously, anyone that lives in the city, any resident or homeowner can do their part. It's no matter how small your property is, parts of it do drain eventually to a stream or a lake, and anything you can do to mitigate how many pollutants you have getting there, whether it's fertilizer or dirt from your car or whatever. I mean, it all helps in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the main reasons we wanted to have you on is you have a very highly visible project going on right now along the Ralston Creek Trail out there by the Westwoods Golf Course. It's known as the Ralston Creek Improvement Project. Massive project. I didn't realize myself how big it was until I went out there and saw kind of the footprint of the construction that's going on. So share with us about the history, the need for that improvement project, and what folks can expect when it's all said and done.
Yeah, so this project dates back to 2013, and for folks that were, living in Colorado at that time, in fall of that year, I think it was September, a large part of the Front Range just got hit with massive rainstorm. And it was a weird rainstorm too, because it wasn't like it was super intense, but it was just so persistent, and it lasted for I think like 3 days straight, just constant rain. And it just overwhelmed a lot of areas. And I think in particular Boulder, Longmont, I think maybe Loveland probably got hit the hardest from that, like the most damage. But there were still areas here around the Denver metro area that got hit pretty bad too. And in particular here in Arvada, this area got hit the hardest on Ralston Creek. And it's kind of, sometimes floodplain management, stormwater management can be tricky because like you don't always know where your pinch points are in your floodplain or in your river system until a flood actually happens sometimes. And that's just the unfortunate nature of it. I mean, we do these studies, and we do our best to model and analyze floodplains and know like where that flood risk is. But you can only do so much with that, and Mother Nature can be unpredictable, climate can be unpredictable. So I think the 2013 floods were bad, but in a way they helped us understand where the problem areas were around the city. And so, yeah, this particular area on Ralston Creek got hit really bad. I think there were a few other spots, like along Little Dry Creek to the north, and maybe some other spots along Ralston Creek that got hit pretty bad. So that was kind of the driving factor for the city at the time to want to do something here and fix what was going on. And really, this is kind of an interesting project area because there's a lot going on around it. You have the creek that's running through sort of the middle of the Westwoods golf course out there. And it gets up to, once it gets to the east side of the golf course, it runs into, well, not runs into, but you have this this crossing that goes over the Croat Canal, and the Croat Canal is one of the major irrigation suppliers here in the city and also the greater metro region. But it's kind of interesting how it works because the creek actually goes over the canal. So they built kind of like this like concrete channel that carries the water over the canal water, and it's kind of it's a really cool design. But when you look at it, you're thinking like, that, that the size of that compared to the rest of the size of the creek in the floodplain is kind of small. Like that's probably a pinch point area, right? And you have some other critical infrastructure around there too. Like we have a city-owned pump station out there that helps pump raw water to all different parts of the city, reservoirs, things like that. And so that's like pretty close to the creek right there, and definitely is something that we want to protect and not be impacted by flood flows. So yeah, you go out there and look at it and you're like, oh, well, obviously it's this crossing area that would have caused water to back up and flood everywhere. But actually what ended up happening is just upstream of this crossing, there's a pedestrian bridge. And that pedestrian bridge actually has even less flood capacity than the crossing. So what happened in 2013 is the whole area upstream of this bridge is heavily wooded, heavily forested. There's unfortunately there were a lot of dying trees, there were a lot of fallen branches, trees coming into the river, and you can imagine just the amount of like debris and branches and things that got carried down by the flood, and sure enough just got pushed right up against that bridge. And that basically just acted like a dam, right? And it just sent so much water all over the place. It didn't even really make it to the actual concrete crossing that we were just talking about. A lot of it ended up just going to the north and into the golf course, things like that. The canal itself runs north-south, perpendicular to the creek, and so a lot of that water was flowing to the north and piling up against the canal embankment. So the embankment itself kind of is perched up a bit and is higher than the surrounding land. So again, like that canal was almost acting like another dam, and so the water wasn't able to just flow downstream and get to where it needed to go. And it was getting so bad over the course of those 3 days that officials had to come out. I think like crews from the canal company, from the city, had to come out and actually intentionally breach that canal in certain spots so that water could just get through and stop just getting higher and higher on the upstream side. So that was definitely pretty scary. And at the time, it was okay where it flooded to the east because there wasn't anything really there. It was more open space. Whereas now, that area has been developed pretty heavily. And so I think at the time, the city knew that was on the horizon, that area was going to get developed. And they definitely did not want this sort of situation to happen again, this huge flood. So that sort of kickstarted this whole project. And luckily, we have a wonderful project partner over at the Mile High Flood District. They're usually our main partner on these types of bigger stream projects, and they're experts in this sort of field. So at the time, the city officials got with folks over at the Flood District. They walked these certain areas, walked to this Ralston Creek one, walked some of the ones at Little Dry Creek too that got hit, and they figured out priorities of which ones they were going to fix. And this one was hard. The Ralston Creek one at first was like, well, I mean, I think we know what we need to do, but this is going to be an expensive project, and we need time to like design this, get funding figured out, figure out all the permitting and all that. So that one that got put like high on the list, but they knew that they weren't going to be able to fix it right away.
It wasn't going to be like a quick win. Yeah.
Yeah, it was going to be a long-term project. Whereas some of the other ones, other areas that got hit, they were pretty easy to just like get in there and do some spot repairs on parts of the creek. But yeah, so a lot of history on that, a lot that kind of led up to this. But it's cool too because it stemmed as more of just like a flood protection, stream protection, stabilization project. But then as we got further through design, we started realizing that there were a lot of other overlapping goals with like the Parks Department and just how this system was functioning. They, our forester, I think at the time knew that, this area was really nice with how forested it was and all the trees, but from a management standpoint, it was kind of it wasn't great, just because it was constricting the floodplain so much and the flood flows, and there were trees that were starting to die off, branches falling. It was a health and safety risk to trail users. So that was a goal that had already been kind of established by the parks team to try to thin this area out and better manage it and put trees in better spots. So it just made sense to include that as part of this project too, and try to achieve that. And
I think it's on like the fourth hole of the Cottonwood course there at Westwoods is where we're talking about. It's like on the right side there, and that was some thick vegetation there. I know if you ever hit a ball over on that side, it's like forget it, you're never going to find it there. So it'll be like night and day difference from what it used to be, from what it's going to turn out to be. Where kind of is the project at now? Because I know recently there was a pretty big milestone of the bridge being installed. There's a trail closure right now. So where's the status of that project, and when can we expect it maybe to be finished? I know it's tough to nail down specific timeline on things like this, but
yeah, it can be pretty tough. But I would say we're more than halfway done now. And yeah, our most recent milestone was getting the new pedestrian bridge in place. And I didn't really touch on that yet either, but that's one of the biggest parts of this project. Is we knew that that old pedestrian bridge was a pinch point, and I think at the time it only had capacity for maybe like a 2-year flood event, which is pretty small, and we can talk more about that later too. But like 2-year is not ideal for our systems. We usually like to at least get at least like a 25-year flood carrying capacity. 100-year is maybe the ideal, but that's always maybe not as cost feasible for something like this. And we did run through a whole sort of alternatives analysis of like, well, how much should we try to pass through here? And we tried to use some of the flow data from that 2013 flood as a good sort of benchmark. And interestingly enough, I mean, that flood I think was only maybe like a 10-year flood. So it's kind of crazy like how catastrophic it was, but it still was maybe, nowhere close to a 100-year flood that you would think. So it's kind of crazy the power of flood flows. But we did sort of use that as a benchmark and figured like, okay, well, let's at least pass that again. We want to make sure we can at least get the 10-year through. But we did a whole cost benefit analysis on that and ended up at like somewhere between like a 25-year and 50-year flood event to pass under the new bridge that we just put in. So that was the goal there, and that was perfect too, because that ended up matching fairly well with how much capacity that downstream concrete channel has over the canal. So I think that just made the most sense from like a practicality and economic standpoint. But
yeah, and you mentioned the trail is closed for the public now till probably at least June, sometime in June. Hopefully they can get it reopened. They started work in February. And so it's just a lot of heavy equipment through there. It's not safe for the traveling public to be that close to heavy equipment. The trail's pretty ripped up, that sort of thing. So they have detours there.
it'll be worth the wait though, because I've seen the renderings of what this project's going to look like when it's complete, and there's some really exciting features, amenities that'll be included. It's not just to make it more resistant to flooding. I mean, this is going to be an amenity for folks using the trail in that area.
Yeah, that's definitely the goal with our projects too. We don't want to just like put something in there that'll, it'll function and work well. We want it to also look nice too. So that's also too where we can intersect with, with like parks and some of their goals, and maybe make the area look nice. And that also too, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of those other features was going to be kind of like a soft trail pull-off area near the bridge. And we figured that would help a lot too with just some of the traffic through there. If, as it's getting busier, it's a good spot for like pedestrians to pull off from and maybe get out of the craziness of some of the bike traffic. Yep. And also the way we oriented it and designed it is it does provide access to the creek, to the river, so folks can actually kind of get more up close with it and see it and actually see what we did there, which is great. We want to show off our work and our design there. So I think that'll be a pretty cool feature, and we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, it's kind of like a pretty natural still. It's not going to look like a park or anything, but like just kind of resting area that someone could pull off. Even if you are like cycling through the area, you could stop and, take a water break or whatever and have kind of a spot to enjoy the nature there.
Definitely.
Yeah,
that's always a goal too with our river restoration projects. We want it to still look as natural as we can when we're all done. We don't want to just put like concrete in everywhere and have this straight channel like, they have out of like the LA River or something. Like that's kind of a little bit of an eyesore. So trying to just make things just look as natural as you can, but still function and provide erosion protection, provide flood mitigation, flood risk mitigation, and things like that. So
very cool. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So June, July kind of time frame to get that hopefully close to
Yeah.
done. Probably
Yeah,
some
that's
ongoing landscaping and things.
Yeah.
So what other projects are on the horizon for floodplain and stormwater?
Yeah, we always have ongoing smaller projects around the city, maybe like some local drainage issues that just need to be fixed up, maybe like a storm pipe that needs to be replaced or a storm drain that's damaged, things like that. So we always have those smaller ones going on. We have a few floodplain studies that we are trying to wrap up for some of our main river systems. So those are hopefully going to be wrapped up this year or next year. And those are important too because those are basically like our master plans for our open drainage ways and our creeks. And those help a lot in just informing us like what's next on the horizon, what should we be putting our next priority and funding towards. And it also serves as like a catalyst to work with the Mile High Flood District too, because they also work with us on those master plans and determine like the next project area. And if it makes sense to both parties, then they participate and match our funding. So it's almost like we get double bang for our buck on those capital improvement projects through there. But I would
they're
say
a good
too,
partner.
yeah,
Yeah, and then I know you have some of the detention ponds that, like near the Arvada Center, and some of those that maybe people will start to see. I'm not really sure what the
yeah.
plans
That's
are with those.
that's actually it is kind of a different way of thinking about like flood mitigation, where instead of we do have a few projects on the horizon where we're looking at implementing more flood detention ponds around our creeks, and I can touch more on that here in a little bit, but it's kind of an alternative to, instead of like doing all this work on a creek and trying to fix up a certain segment, there's ways where we can just almost construct like a holding pond somewhere within the watershed to help hold these flood flows for a little bit and slowly release the water into the creek, as opposed to just, if a pond wasn't there, there would just be this huge slug of water hitting the river and causing more erosion and flooding and things like that. So we're trying to take this, more holistic look at, are there spots within these watersheds where we can put these detention ponds, which end up usually being a lot cheaper than a bigger like stream restoration capital project, and provide a lot more benefit. And they're kind of cool too, because a lot of times we can, install them in like a park, or like the upcoming one we're looking at trying to do within that open space at the Arvada Center. We put these in, and most of the time they're dry and they function as just a dry pond, and they're really just there to intercept big flows that come through in like a heavy storm. But for the most part, after all is said and done, ideally you don't even know that they're there. You could be just hanging out in a park and you wouldn't even know that it's really just kind of this big holding pond, which is kind of cool to think about, because then, that's where we do kind of let the artistic side of it, we explore that more and try to add these kind of cool features to the detention facility and sort of blend it in with the surrounding landscape so that you don't even really know it is.
Do you have any
engineering feature.
examples of that exist now that maybe we could reference?
Yeah, one that sort of comes to mind. Actually, there's two that come to mind. I think over at like Moon Gulch Park, off 72nd there, west of Sims, I want to say. I think that's actually a detention pond, and that one you can kind of tell because it sort of dips down a little bit off the road there into the park. So I think that one acts as a facility. And then also Homestead Park.
That was going to be the one, I guess, because you can tell it's like a bowl. Yeah. It's like this giant field that's kind of a bowl,
So there are a few out there already, which is kind of cool, and you probably wouldn't even know it if you didn't know. So, yeah.
Then I assume they do, but do they have like drains on one side, like the east side of those parks somewhere?
Yeah, they do, and that's like where most of the engineering comes into play, is like, how do you design these drains so that you're only releasing like a certain amount of water in a given storm event? And it's kind of crazy. Like the engineering that goes into that is pretty complicated, and even I have like, 13, 14 years of experience in the industry, and even I still struggle with designing certain detention facilities here and there. There's a lot that goes into it for sure.
Very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Before we move on to the lightning round, we like to wrap up our interviews with our guests and provide them the opportunity to clear up any misconceptions about the work that you and your team does. So now's your time, Sam. Like, what are some of the things that you hear a lot that's not necessarily correct or that you want to clear up?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I would say with trees, it's always difficult with these with our projects. We always run into trying to work around trees, and it makes sense, right? Because it's a waterway. They like to grow around it. It makes sense. And again, you can go back to the analogy of like a rural versus urban system. And if we were just in the rural countryside and there were a bunch of trees growing around the river, like that's fine. Like if one were to fall over or die or a branch were to fall, like, really no harm, no foul. It's not really affecting anything. But again, when you get out into these more residential urban settings and you have infrastructure around it, like the bridge or trails or, anything, then management of those trees starts to get a lot more complicated, and it's always difficult to we always put a lot of thought in figuring out if we should remove certain trees or keep them or try to work around them, and it always sounds like a good idea on paper to say yeah, we can just work around it, but then unfortunately a lot of times you get in construction and you find out oh wow, that root system extends a lot further than we thought. We can still work around it, but we may do more harm to it than good, and it may not survive. So that's always, we always put a ton of thought into trying to figure out which trees should we consider removing, where should we replant new ones so they're in a better location, they still provide that habitat and aesthetic benefit, but aren't impeding flood flows in the creek or causing erosion concerns or other health concerns or safety concerns. So we always put a lot of thought into that, and for this particular project, we hired a landscape architect and an ecologist to help us look at that and understand where the bird habitat was, and which trees we absolutely need to keep and which ones were okay to remove or trim down or something like that. But then also helping with determining where to put new ones.
Yeah, I think there's so many factors to trees that are important to people. Like you just mentioned the bird habitat and just the natural habitat for the animals that live in that area. It can affect that. And so, as you just said, you think about that a lot. And then for your average traveling public or neighbor, some of the creek projects are, essentially people's backyards. They feel like they're getting shade from a tree, and trees take a really long time to grow. So it can feel really hard, but the reality is trees die just like everything else eventually. And they can, particularly really big trees, can at some point, they kind of have to go. But I know, Colorado, that sun can be intense. And so people having that shade, I know it can be really, people really grieve trees when we have to remove them. And so that's very understandable, but it's also just a reality of the work sometimes.
I mean, I feel it. I grieve too on some of my projects. I'll fight tooth and nail for a certain tree sometimes, but then, you try so hard and you keep looking at it and you do what you can to avoid it, but sometimes it's just not possible. And I think the good way to look at it though is okay, yeah, this is gonna not be great for the short term, but knowing just long term in the future, it's going to just be so much better and function so much better. I think as long as you go into it with that mindset, then it helps ease the heartburn a little bit better. I mean, you're still going to, be sad about it, but it definitely helps looking at it from that perspective.
And then one thing also I wanted to follow up on was the 2-year, 10-year flood sort of. Can you help understand that? Because we touched on it earlier, but we never explained it. So what is a 50-year flood as opposed to a 10-year flood? Yeah,
those are terms that get thrown around a lot. And it's a simpler way of thinking about it, too. It's all kind of probability and statistics based. But really the kind of more engineering way to think about it is it's like a percentage. So 2-year flood, it's like once every 2 years, you may get a flood of that size that'll hit your creek. So that's like a 50% chance flood on any given year. Or like a 100-year flood, that's a 1 out of every 100 years. So it's a 1% chance flood on any given year that it could happen. But, even then, Mother Nature doesn't work that way. Yeah. She's not just going to be looking oh, it's been 100 years, time to send a flood down there. Right? It's or even oh, well, I have a 4% chance of this happening. Maybe I should make that. Even percentage based, it just doesn't work that way. So I mean, our whole lifetime we may never see a 100-year flood on Ralston Creek or ever. It's just, it's always, we do our best to predict it with just rainfall data, historical data, climate conditions, things like that. But in the end, we're kind of all at the mercy of, what Mother Nature wants to do, what the creek wants to do, and so you may never see something that big.
Yeah.
Right.
I was surprised to hear that 2013 flood was only a 20-year flood, but maybe it was like 100-year flood up in Lyons or something like that, and down here it was a 20-year flood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it definitely is more like spatial too. Like
Yeah.
they definitely got hit the hardest more
Yeah.
up there with their rain. And we have our reservoir too. So I think the Arvada reservoir did a great job of almost acting like a detention
Yeah.
pond and helping to hold back those flows and not just sending a huge slug of water down.
Yeah.
Right. Some of the flooding was like bigger rivers than like I think the Thompson in Loveland was
Yeah.
because I had a flood day at CSU. Like we got school off because of that flood,
Nice.
which was wild. I mean, like, yeah, you don't hear about that
Flood
ever.
day.
Right.
It was really what it was. It was because so many roads were closed. And then while we're on the flood piece, so the floodplain through Arvada largely is along the Ralston Creek.
Yeah.
And I was going to say trail. And part of the city's work is to keep a something called a community rating system, and we do like an annual progress report on that. And how that matters for our listeners is that if you live near a floodplain, or everybody gets a discount on their flood insurance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that CRS program is administered through FEMA, and so as part of that program, if we do a good job just managing flood risk around the city, implementing like flood warning programs or just like informational programs just to give people the information they need to know their flood risk, or even undertaking projects like this where we're improving a system, that gains us like points and credits under this rating system. And the way it works too is it's like a ranking. So the higher your rank, the more of a discount you get for your residents on their flood insurance if they want to purchase flood. If you're within a floodplain, I think you're required by FEMA and your mortgage
Right.
company to purchase flood insurance. But yeah, through the practices that we can do here, through the city, we can get better and better discounts for folks just by managing that.
And we
better.
can link to some info for folks about that if they want some more info. I know we just updated our progress
Oh, yeah.
report, so I just put that online. Well, Sean,
All right.
Sean's doing the lightning round today.
Okay, mixing it up. Here we go. Just a couple quick questions to get to know you a little bit better on a more personal level. Question number one is, what is your favorite thing about Arvada? It could be a place or a fact or even a hidden gem.
Yeah, there's two. I would either say it's the parks. I think all the parks are awesome, and there's just so many of them so close by, and they all kind of have their unique. Some of them I've noticed have their own unique like theme or something
Yeah.
like that. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Or just like driving out west and just seeing the amazing mountain views. I think especially on like parts of 72nd, it's just the views are incredible. So I have to say those two.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your first, last, or best concert?
Yeah, I think the last concert I went to was, I think it was Run the Jewels and Wu-Tang Clan at Fiddler's Green.
Okay.
And that's really not even my style of music, but it was still super fun. I had a great time regardless, but
Nice. Yeah.
And then what brought you to work for the city of Arvada?
yeah, I moved around a lot as a kid, lived in a lot of different towns around the metro area. I lived in Arvada for a little bit, and I think that was definitely my favorite time. Again, I think we lived right next to a park, and I loved going there all the time. And I think that was an easy choice now, kind of growing up, that I wanted to move back here. And I think I always had it in the back of my mind too that eventually I wanted to work for a municipality doing something. And I saw this job posting open up, like, I don't know, a year or two after I moved here, and it was right up my alley and exactly what I wanted to keep doing, and just kind of do projects that were more impactful to me and within my backyard, and just see that firsthand. So it just made sense.
Yeah. What was your first job?
Oh man, like first job, just working. doing
Yeah,
everything?
sometimes we put
Either way.
technicality if you get like the W-2 job, or it could just be whatever.
Oh
job.
man, my first job I ever had was I was a golf caddy actually,
nice.
and I was at Lakewood Country Club, and I was so bad at it. I was awful. It was
That's
not
funny.
my cup of tea. It also kind of gave me a little bit of disdain for golf.
Oh,
I think
no.
too, so it maybe ruined my view of it, but. That's just because it just wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
But, it was an interesting job.
Yeah. And then finally, do you have a favorite project that you've done with the city?
Yeah, it may not seem as glamorous, but it was my first project that I was able to design myself and manage and oversee construction. So it was basically from start to finish, and it was just like a smaller kind of local drainage project, just like a storm sewer that needed to be fixed up. And like, yeah, again, it wasn't anything glamorous. It was no like Lake Arbor project or this project, but it was just like, I think it was just the more personable aspect of it. And like, this is something that I have a hand in, fixing. And I know there were some residents impacted by it, so it was like great to interact with them and understand what they were going through and the problems they were facing with it, and then help come to a solution and fix that, and just see things turn around from there for them. So I'd say that.
Yeah, very cool.
Love it.
Well, thanks, Sam. Really appreciate you coming on and being our guest. I know I learned a ton about the work you and your team do, so appreciate it.
It was great. Thanks again. It's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, before we let you go, as a reminder, we always love to hear from you all, our listeners, so please stay in touch with us. You can text us with the link at the top of the show notes, or email us at podcast@arvada.org. Do you have any questions for Sam, or any other episode ideas or things you'd like to hear more about? Please let us know. And some upcoming news and events. The first bulky item drop-off event was here at the end of April and went really well. The next one is coming up Saturday, June 7th, again from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. out at the North Area Athletic Complex, or the NAC. And they are checking IDs this year. Be sure to bring proof of residency through an ID or a utility bill, and you can learn more about the types of items that are accepted at arvadaco.gov/bulky items. And then just wanted to give a quick update because there are a lot of utility projects and construction that is city-managed projects happening. And so folks may have seen, if you drive out on Indiana, there's been some work just south of Candelas Parkway, between Candelas Parkway and 86th Parkway. That's for a new water line installation, and there's just a couple more months of construction there. We've had some questions about that. And then 2 sewer line repair and replacement projects are underway on the east side of town. And so one under Sheridan between 68th and 76th Avenues, and then on Tennyson from just north of I-76 to 64th Avenue is where that one's taking place. And those are both to increase capacity and just the resiliency of the aging sewer pipes there. And so I'll link to those projects if those are areas you travel through. All of those projects have, really long construction timelines, like 9 to 12 months type of thing. So just some work, and good to take an alternate route if you have one.
And then a busy time of year with events going on as we get into summer. The city is hosting its annual Volunteer Appreciation event coming up on Saturday, May 31st. That'll be at Memorial Park this year. We'll have food trucks, custom gifts for our volunteers, and some live music as well. Please RSVP if you haven't already. And if you didn't get the invite, you can check with your volunteer coordinator and they can make sure you get that. The Ralston Central Splash Pad and the Old Town Fountain will be open for the season coming up Memorial Day weekend, starting Saturday, May 24th. Please keep in mind that the pavilion and the picnic tables there at Ralston Central Park cannot be reserved. They're first come, first serve, and so we ask that you please be courteous and limit your time there, as well as clean up once you're done so that whoever's next can enjoy that space as well. We do have 11 pavilions that you can reserve, and we can link that in the show notes at arvadaco.gov/parkpavilions. The Lake Arbor Center and Golf Course Master Plan is hosting a second community open house on Thursday, May 29th. That'll be at Pomona High School this time from 6 to 8 p.m. This meeting in particular will be dedicated specifically to discussion about the community center and pool. We'll have a separate meeting in the future to discuss the future of the golf course as we continue to evaluate stakeholder feedback. Please RSVP to that community open house to let us know that you're coming at arvadaco.gov/Lake Arbor Master Plan. And then finally, Arvada Summerfest, the first ever Summerfest, is coming quickly on Saturday, June 7th. That's a new event this year, hosted by the Arvada Festivals Commission. You can enjoy live music, a pet swimsuit parade and competition, and lots of free family fun activities. To learn more, visit arvadaco.gov/Summerfest. Or you can listen to our next episode where we'll have Adele Burton, our special events manager, on sharing about that new event. Thanks again to our guest today, Sam Rogers. As I mentioned, Adele's our guest next time. Today's podcast was recorded and edited by Arvada Media Services. Today's fun fact is that nearly 24,000 cubic yards of gunk and sediment was dredged out of Lake Arbor, which is just over 30,000 tons, and that's equivalent to roughly 6,000 African elephants.
Whoa.